night that Jesus was arrested, he had been in the garden, as we know, praying. The three of the inner circle, his closest friends, his closest earthly companions, kept falling asleep. With the stress and literally the weight of the world itself upon his shoulders, his sweat had become like drops of blood. And when they arrived to arrest him, it was one of the 12 that he had hand chosen that led him to him. They took him that night and they tried him, and they didn't just try him. They put together what we would call a kangaroo court. That's our kind of lingo today. And even in the set up, made up court with false evidence, they still couldn't find anything to charge him with. They blindfolded him and hit him in the face and told him, "Prophesy for us, who hit you?" And when they were done with them and realized they couldn't do anything with them, they turned him over to Pontius Pilate and said, "This man says that he's a king, and we have no king but Caesar. He should be tried, he should be put to death. Our law demands it because he has blasphemed. But your law should demand it because he is trying to raise up sedition." I didn't say that exact word, but Pontius Pilate tries him. He finds nothing wrong with him. He tries to appease him, and he sends him off to Herod. He finds nothing. He brings him back. He beats him with a Roman scourging. He brings him back out before the people, and he says, "Our tradition is to release one person this time of year to you. Do you want us to release Jesus or Barabbas?" And they say, "Release to us Barabbas." And they looked at Jesus and they chanted, "Crucify, crucify." And after Pontius Pilate symbolically washes his hand, he gives the order to crucify him. And they drag him. He drags the cross as far as he can, and then they drag it and him. They have someone else drag the cross up that mountain onto the hill there that looks like a skull. And they began to beat nails into his hands. And we always see the picture of it through the palm of the hand. It was probably right in here somewhere, in which every nerve ending in your hand goes. And then through his feet. And then they had a big hole dug there in which they'd take that and just plop it into the hole so everything would jar down. In the book of Luke, chapter 23, after they had done all this to Jesus, he says something absolutely remarkable to me. If you would pick up with me in verse 30. Then they began to say to us, Then they began to say to the mountain, "Sorry, fall on us, and to the hills cover us, for if they do these things in the green wood, what will be done in the dry?" There were also two other criminals led with him to be put to death. And when they had come to the place called Calvary, there they crucified him, and criminals, one on the right hand, one on the left. And then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." And then he divided his clothes and cast lots for them. I guess I've read this story, I don't know how many times. I constantly rehearse, as I'm sure that you do. We do every Sunday, or at least we should, as we gather around the table. It should be always a thought, even if it's passing in the back of our minds, in the front of our minds, of what Jesus has done for us. But you get to this line, and I struggle. If someone were to take and try you falsely, never mind the scourging, never mind being blindfolded and hit in the face. I can't speak for the ladies, but I'm going to go right to you fellas. Imagine being blindfolded and hit in the face. How would you react? What would be in your heart? Where would your thoughts be? And then to be turned over by your own people to the pagans to be put to death. Now, Jesus knew everything that was coming. But then he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. This is what we're going to talk about this morning. I just got a couple thoughts up here that just kind of outline this a little bit. But those words, those very words, there's a lot going on here. There's a lot to be talked about here, but that's where our focus is going to be. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. There's a reality of the cross that we're going to have to look at, and we've already obviously started to, but the true fruit of worldly wisdom. We're going to kind of piggyback a little bit from last week. And then we're going to talk about real forgiveness and where it comes from. But I want to look at one section here that we were just getting into, just looking at in chapter 23. Go back to verse 21. Before Pontius Pilate, and here is, he just wanted to beat him. That's all he wanted to do, and let him go. He didn't care a bit about this man being innocent. He just wanted him away from him and the problems away from him. And they want Jesus crucified. Look at verse 20. Pilate, therefore, wishing to release Jesus again, called out to them, but they shouted, saying, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" And then he said to them, the third time, "What evil has he done? I have found no reason for death in him. I will therefore chastise him and let him go." But they were insistent, demanding with loud voices that he be crucified. And the voices of these men and of the chief priest prevailed. I can't help but realize that this is a mob of people. In our day, we would call them protesters. Standing before the government, chanting, "Crucify, crucify." And the government gives in. Pontius Pilate, in this case, gives in. And he's going to put him to death. Now, we know that there is a greater purpose in this cross than the occasion of these men, of these women, of these people, and their evil hearts and their evil ways. But I want to make sure that, as we did last week, that we understand who all's involved here and what's going on. This isn't a group of people off on the side in some remote part of the world, in some dark place that has some backwards ideas. You've got the leadership of the Jews, God's own hand-chosen people. You have Herod, which I'm not going to say anything of his moral abilities, because he certainly didn't have any, but he's king of the region. And then you have Pilate, which represents the world empire of that day. The economic giant, the army, the worldly and wise pillars. We always, if you go back to your history classes, those of you who are a little bit older, you might remember how Rome was a quote-unquote model for our republic. Yeah, it is and it isn't, but how often it was praised about its government and its wisdom and all these things. Though it was very vacuous, it was very evil, it was devoid of anything really of any kind of moral purity, but we champion it. These are the people that are deciding to put Jesus to death. Because this is worldly wisdom. I want to do this, and I really want to go a couple different ways with this morning, so I'm going to try to stay on track. But I want you to go with me to the book of James. And I want you to think about this as you're turning there, what Jesus said. I don't know how many times I've gone to the phrase, and I've gone just like I've presented to you. How would you feel? What would you think? What would you, how would you react if someone, falsely tried you, that you were beaten, scourged, half an inch to your life? dragged up and crucified and stuck in a hole next to two other criminals when you're completely innocent? How would you feel? And I realized the other day I was looking at this. I was looking at, I'll be honest with you, at a whole different lesson this morning. And I was in this text just doing some reading. And when I read this verse that I've read I don't know how many times again, I looked at it again and noticed something. And I want to go back to what he said. They know not what they do. They're ignorant. This is the brightest minds of the world. And he says they're as dumb as a box of rocks. The reason why Jesus is able to say that is he has a different perspective, that he's godly and that he's forgiving. And we say all that. I don't doubt that a bit. But he says, God, forgive them. Father, forgive them. For they don't have a clue. They don't have a clue. Look what James says about worldly wisdom here in James chapter 3. I'll put it on the board. Starts in verse 14. He says, but if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, does that describe the mob? Does that describe our world today? But if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, do not boast against the truth. This wisdom does not descend from above, but is earthly, sensual, demonic. For where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there. I want you to notice this. This wisdom. What wisdom? The world's wisdom. Now, we said last week, and I will make the point again, that the world is darkness. Jesus came in as a light. We're supposed to be a light to a dark world, and then we get shocked and surprised, and I understand it because of our heritage and so forth, but when the world shows that it's dark, this is what the world produces. Confusion, evil thinking, self-seeking, boasting. He calls it demonic. Jesus on the cross, he says, Father, I know, forgive them, for they know not what they do. They have absolutely no clue. They're completely ignorant. In all their wisdom, in all their study, in all their pursuits, they have been found weighed and lacking. It's not that Jesus is saying it with arrogance, but he's saying truth. Now, there's two things I want you to get out of this, and I hope that you can connect with. Is one, the ability, we're going to talk about that here in a second, the ability to forgive comes from not worldly wisdom, from somewhere else. But two, God is the only place that has truth. We are constantly bombarded with the idea that we need to compromise. We are constantly bombarded with the idea that, well, we just kind of hedge around the edges, cut away some of the rough stuff, and then the world is going to love us. And they're just going to pour in, they're going to fill the buildings, and we're going to march a whole bunch of people right into heaven's gates. The world crucified Jesus. The world is not going to love us. But it's not because, innate in mankind is some kind of desire to, it's because they're ignorant. And here's where I'm going to pick up on the same thing from last week. It is our responsibility to teach them. In the book of Ephesians, chapter 3, and I think this was brought up in a Bible study maybe a week or two ago by Daryl, but if you turn over there real quick, Ephesians chapter 3. As Paul is writing to the church at Ephesus, he's talking about really the reality of Christ in his church. And we reference and may reference a lot of this quite often because it's such powerful truth in this particular book. I remember. It was last Sunday night. Daryl was talking about Ephesians. And here is Paul writing about not only his charge, but then the church's charge. And I want to take a couple pieces here to look at this, and then we'll come back to our thought. He says in verse 2, if indeed you have heard of the dispensation of the grace of God, which was given to me for you, how that by revelation he made known to me the mystery, as I have briefly written already, by which when you read, you may understand my knowledge in the mystery of Christ, which in other ages was not made known to the sons of men, as it has been now revealed by the Spirit to his holy apostles and prophets. By the way, if you want to go back and read this for a whole nother context, Paul didn't say it was revealed to anybody else. Anybody that wants to proclaim inspiration directly from God has to contend with Paul's words right here. He revealed it to the apostles and the prophets. They revealed it to us. Now, what are we supposed to do with it? Drop down to verse 8. To me, who am less than the least of the saints, this grace was given that I should preach among the Gentiles. Verse 9, to make all see what is the fellowship and the mystery which from the beginning of the ages has been hidden in God, who created all things through Jesus Christ. To the intent, verse 10, that now the manifold wisdom of God may be known by the church, may be made known by the church, the principalities and powers in the heavenly places. It's our job. And, I hit this thing last week. We have, and I'm saying as a church, as a body, I'm not indicting anybody individually. We have shirked our responsibility. We have depended too long on everything else to kind of, make the way for us. And it's not there anymore. And last week, I had a lot of people, and I appreciate you, and I appreciate your support, and I appreciate your encouragement, come up to me and say how they really appreciate the message, really appreciate the thing. And then here's the thing, and I don't want, I do want to step on your toes a little bit. Okay, so between last Sunday and this Sunday, what'd you do with it? Our problem is not a problem of church buildings or programs. Our problem is a problem with getting a hold of God's wisdom and living it. Back to our thoughts from Luke chapter 23. This is actually James chapter 3 again, but we'll get there in a second. Luke chapter 23, after all this evil is done to Jesus, and he's put up on that cross, and he's mocked and humiliated by the Jews, he's mocked and humiliated by the Gentiles, he's mocked and humiliated even by the thieves on the cross. He says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. The world needs real wisdom. I don't want you to get the wrong idea that the world is anxious to hear it, because it's not, but the world needs it. God is not going to send angels into the world to teach it. God is not going to raise up prophets with miraculous abilities to wander through Europe or anywhere else, as somebody on TV might tell us. God gave the charge to the church to teach the powers in this world. But what did Jesus say? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. What does that mean about me and where I am? I started off this whole thing by asking you to imagine if you were there. You were blindfolded, you were punched in the face, you were persecuted, you were crucified, you're the one on the cross, you're the one going through all this. Never mind for the weight of the world, but just going through all this. How would you feel? How would you react? How would you think? How was Jesus able to say that? Here's James. This is the rest of what James says about wisdom in that context. He says, but the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. So, going back to the illustration once more, when I say I couldn't have done that, when I say I couldn't have stood there and gone through those things and then turned around and said, Father, forgive them. And I freely admit I'd have an awfully hard time saying such a thing. What I'm revealing is my own ignorance. Somewhere along the line, we have convinced ourselves that being a good Christian is staying out of trouble, going to some church services, giving a little bit of my money, and then going about my life. Somewhere along the line, we've convinced ourselves, maybe because we haven't been persecuted like other people have in the world and around and throughout the generations, that all my Christian responsibility is to try to be a good father and not cheat on my wife and maybe not be too bad on my kids. Somewhere along the line, we forgot the idea that Jesus said that I have wisdom that's going to save and change the world. I've given it to you so you can share it with everybody else. And we can't share it with anybody else because we don't have it ourselves. I'm going to put this to you, and I'm going to try to, leave it with you. But the idea here is not, oh, you're a terrible person, and you should go home and repent right now. And if you need to, by the way, then you need to do that. Don't wait till you get home. But that's not the idea. That's not the point. The point is not, okay, I didn't study 8 hours today. I'm a terrible Christian. I'm falling down. That's not the point. The point is, do we see the value in what Jesus saw value in? He knew their ignorance. He knew what it was leading to. John starts the book in John chapter 1, and we read it last week. And the Word became flesh, and the Word dwelt among us as the only begotten, full of grace and full of truth. But what did he say back in verse 5? And he was the light, and the light was the life of men, and the light came into the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Can't understand it. We have a lot of people, and I'm glad that we do, that are anxious, that are troubled by where we're going in this country and in this world and the things around about us. But what's the solution? You got to get more into what God is into. You want to fix your family, you got to get into, you want to fix your life, you got to get more into what God is into. The world does not have the answers. The world has confusion, hatred, self-seeking, and all those things that we read from the book of James. And it's demonic. You want to change your life, you want to change your world, you want to change your community, you want to change your family, then you need to be more into what God's into than what the world is into. If that's not true, you come see me afterwards and you correct me, but I believe that's true. And I believe ultimately the cross says it louder than anything. This world is worried about position. It's worried about tradition. It's worried about what mama says, what daddy had done. It's worried about what our neighbors think of us. It's worried about everything other than what God is interested in. And then we wonder why we struggle and we fight and we clamor and we have a hard time in all kinds of different aspects. But the solution is simple but difficult at the same time. Right there. I'm going to selfishly plug this, and I don't mind it a bit. Wednesday night, we're going to start a new series. I'm not teaching it. Brandon's teaching it. Still teaching that, right? Okay, that's good. I think he's doing it. It's on social issues and stuff. Now, if you believe me, if you agree with me, I should say that, that our solution is more in the Word of God and the things of God, where will you be Wednesday night?
Amen.
We're going to be talking about the issues that we're probably fussing about on Facebook, and to everybody else that's willing to listen, we'll be talking about it from God's Word Wednesday night. Where will you be? I'm just putting it out there. You may have to work, and I understand that. You may have another commitment that you can't get away from. I'm not trying to rail against everybody. I'm just saying, where's our priority? Tomorrow night, we're hosting the area-wide youth thing, and lucky for you, Joey's speaking, not me. I don't know how many people we'll have here. I don't know how many are going to make it from Lehman. I don't know from South Green Street. There's other stuff going on. I think Stephen's preaching somewhere, and Horizons is going on down at Freed, and you've got all kinds of other stuff going on. I understand that. I know that. Where will we be? Is it fair for us to complain and to fuss about the generation of young people and how they're doing and what they're doing and so forth, and then not come out and support them in good things? If I'm wrong on that, you correct me. Don't just get mad at me and walk away, but you correct me because I want to be corrected, okay? But if Jesus' words are the standard, and the reason why he could say, I forgive them, is because they're ignorant, and the answer to the world is wisdom, true wisdom. And the answer to me being able to forgive that person that I can't get along with, and the answer to me for forgiving someone that's hurt me deeply, is the wisdom of God. Then where's the priority of it in my life? Again, the idea is not to say we're all bad and we're all terrible. I don't think that. I don't believe that. But I do think we need at times, just as Paul said he did, take a check of ourselves. And make sure as we're going through, we're not disqualifying ourselves. But that we're paying mind to the most important things in this world, which is the Word of God. The world is ignorant, and we think it's the wisest thing ever. We default to quote-unquote experts all the time. I'm not saying there's not wisdom in the world, but wisdom apart from God brings nothing but confusion. So here's my challenge then. If you're not a Christian this morning, I just want you to think about one little kind of perspective of this, and then if you are a Christian, maybe a slightly different one. What are you going to gain outside of Christ? What's going to be the goal in life? What are you going to achieve? Is it a legacy? Is it riches and fame? What is it exactly that you keep putting off God, thinking that if you put off God, you're going to be able to gain? You need to be reminded of something just really simple. All this belongs to Him. And we're out there trying to gain this and putting Him to the side. And does that make any sense? And we wonder why we're constantly on the hamster wheel, trying to go after new things and everything else. And it leads us to the same place. Try something different than what the world gives you. Try sitting at Jesus' feet for a while. Maybe this morning you've already done that. Maybe you know what Jesus has said. We want to encourage you to act upon that. But maybe you're a Christian this morning and you're doing the best you can. You're doing everything you can, and you're taking my words this morning and you're thinking, oh man, he's trying to hit me in the head with a hammer. That's not my intention. Not even a rubber mallet. I'm glad somebody chuckled at that. That's not my purpose. I'm not saying quit everything you do right now, open up your Bible and study it, though if that's what it takes, then I'm not discouraging it either. What I'm saying is where's the importance? Don't get distracted by all the good things and leave out the great thing. Don't get so caught up in what the world thinks and what other people might think or what someone might come in and think or whatever. And think about what Jesus thinks. Maybe this morning we can be of assistance with someone or assistance to someone. Maybe it is prayers. Maybe it is someone who would put on Christ this morning. Whatever your need is, would you make it known as we stand together and sing a song of invitation? Oh.